webinar now. So, okay, so one of the classic questions that we get quite often, and Sophie gets this one as well, is in regards to omega-3, how much do we actually really need? So we're all told that we're not consuming enough omega-3, and we're all told that we need to consume more omega-3, but I'm not sure that we really kind of understand just how significant the under-consuming really actually is. And I think we've used this global map quite recently in one of our previous webinars. So this was published quite recently in 2016, and it was an overview really of the omega-3 index on a sort of global pattern. And what it really kind of shows us is that if we look at poor old UK there, sort of bright red, the majority of us in the UK have actually got an omega-3 index of under 4%, which, when we consider how much omega-3 we're actually consuming in regards to sort of fish intake, is actually really, well, it kind of really reflects it quite well. So we are generally recommended that we should be consuming about half a gram of omega-3, a couple of portions of fish, one should be oily, and so on. But what we're actually eating is significantly less of that. So we're not even really kind of consuming our one portion of oily fish. And what I find quite interesting myself, and I've mentioned this before in previous webinars, is that this wonderful sort of data, this line that came from back in 1992 from the British Nutrition Foundation Task Force on Unsaturated Fatty Acids, they suggested a desirable population intake of about 8 grams for women and about 10 grams for men, which equates to about sort of between 1 and 1.5 grams ish per person, or that's the equivalent to about 2 to 3 medium servings of an oily rich fish. And I don't quite know where that kind of data disappeared to, or that kind of advice disappeared to, but we're still really kind of being told that we should just be consuming one portion of oily fish weekly. And then again, some data that we've used before, the sort of stats on how much omega-3 you actually need to take to get your omega-3 index up to about 8%. And given that we are actually sort of hitting a target of under 4%, we would need to consume omega-3s at about the same level as was advised to us back in 1992. So around about a gram to 1.5 grams daily. So we do actually need to be consuming an awful lot more omega-3. So then we get asked, well, we don't necessarily need to supplement, do we? We can just consume more omega-3 just by eating more fish. And the answer to that is, I don't know whether you guys have seen these kind of headlines fairly recently, but again, this is quite recent as well. This is back a couple of months back in October, this sort of hit the BBC. The amount of omega-3s that are actually present in farmed fish has reduced quite substantially in just the sort of like 5 years or so. And this came from the paper that was published in 2006. Earlier in 2006, sorry, in February. And they show some really interesting data when it comes to sort of looking at the amounts of fatty acids, specific fatty acids within the flesh of sort of farmed salmon, for example. And you can see from the levels here that back in 2006, 2007, the amount of EPA and DHA was significantly higher than it is now in sort of 2014, 2015. And with the sort of plummet in levels of EPA and DHA, we're seeing quite a big rise in short-chain omega-6 LA. So the sort of fatty acid profiles of the farmed fish that we're eating now is completely different, which then means that our one portion of oily fish, which used to be sort of perfectly adequate, I guess, government style, for delivering adequate amounts of omega-3 over the week, has kind of increased slightly. So back in 2006, consuming one portion of oily rich fish would give you about 3.5 grams of EPA and DHA based on 130 gram serving. And now we're looking at anywhere between sort of 2 portions, if not a little bit higher. So a lot of, I mean, if you're like me and a lot of my friends, we'd like to keep our fish wild. But even if we're consuming wild fish, the amount of omega-3 within wild fish, obviously because there's less fat in wild fish compared to farmed fish, if you're relying on wild fish to source your omega-3, EPA and DHA, then you'd have to eat even more portions, unfortunately. So yes, the answer is you can get adequate amounts of omega-3 from oily fish if you're prepared to eat it pretty much on a daily basis. So realistically, I guess if you want to get adequate amounts of omega-3 into your cell membranes, you may sort of want to consider topping up with a quality omega-3 supplement. And this then sort of leads us into the sort of area of, okay, so if we're not consuming a huge amount of omega-3, what about the data that comes from clinical trials? How much omega-3 is actually used in clinical trials? Because we hear a lot of kind of bad press in regards to sort of some of the outcomes that we are seeing and hearing. And a lot of the evidence for omega-3, as you're probably aware, comes from some of the sort of major cardiovascular studies. And these studies look at biomarkers, so they look at the omega-3 index, they look at AA to EPA ratio, and they use this as, or they can be described as risk identifying parameters. So changes in the omega-3 index and changes in the AA to EPA ratio can give us an idea of an individual's sort of cardiovascular risk, if you like. A lot of the big clinical trials have used fish oils in a roundabout dose of about 1 gram. Some of them used a little bit higher, but many of the major sort of clinical trials using omega-3 fatty acid supplements have used a dose of about 1 gram. And there was an interesting study published a while ago in which Rupp and his colleagues showed that an omega-3 dose of 1 gram actually only increased the omega-3 index from a mean of about 3.6% to a mere 5.4%, which is, you know, it's a relatively healthy increase, but it's still not sort of obtaining that target of 8% that we should really be aiming for. But what he also showed, or what they also showed actually, was that around about 16% of the subjects actually only achieved an EPA DHA of less than 5% itself, which, given the sort of relationship between omega-3 index, you need to achieve an omega-3 index of over 5% really to see a reduction in sort of cardiovascular issues. So whilst 1 gram a day can increase the sort of risk factors, it may not be enough to offer sort of clinical benefits in regards to sort of cardiovascular health, that's for sure. So the kind of summary of this study really was saying that individual variability as well in blood level response to such a common dose can leave individuals, certainly who are sort of who have elevated risk of cardiovascular disease, still at a risk of cardiovascular disease, simply because a 1 gram dose may not be enough to be able to achieve therapeutic levels of omega-3 index and to reduce the AA to EPA ratio. So it's not surprising actually that some of the sort of bad press that we get from some of the large clinical studies is just purely related to the amount of omega-3 that is taken relative to the amount of omega-3 that we actually need to take. And again, this is one of the slides that we've used in quite a few of our webinars, really, just to really kind of highlight the fact that personalized nutrition really is kind of the way forward. If we look at some of the studies where they recruit people irrespective of their baseline levels, and then they treat them with fixed doses, ignoring the large sort of inter-individual variability between omega-3 status or the variability in uptake itself, it's not surprising that some of the results that we are seeing and hearing about are not as they should be. So there are many factors that can influence how well we incorporate fatty acids into our cell membranes. And we know that body weight and omega-3 dose and omega-3 levels, starting levels, are significant factors that we need to sort of take on board when we are considering omega-3 as an intervention. So relatively speaking, taking an omega-3 simply is not the same as increasing omega-3 levels. And this is where we really need to focus. So we need to focus on how to increase omega-3 levels in individuals. So then we kind of get these questions about, okay, so we understand that actually sort of, you know, we're not taking enough omega-3, but if we all suddenly start taking massive amounts of omega-3, what are the consequences of that? Is it actually possible to take too much omega-3? And the answer is not as black and white as I would like it to be, hence the use of slides in this webinar today. So the question really is, what happens if we take more omega-3 than we kind of need? And I've got my fingers in the air here, sort of emphasizing the fact that we're not quite sure how much omega-3 we actually need. But if we look at the role of omega-3 in inflammation, and this is kind of where we kind of focus our therapeutics on. So we have this sort of idea that taking omega-3 is to decrease omega-6 to help to control inflammatory processes. But actually, if we look at the role of arachidonic acid, so this is our sort of, generally we think of it as pro-inflammatory fatty acid, but actually arachidonic acid itself is really important, not only for sort of initiating inflammation, but actually it plays a role in resolving inflammation. So we need to have omega-6 levels, and primarily AA, arachidonic acid levels, that are substantial enough to be able to play this really important role in actually resolving inflammation. So if we suppress omega-3 levels too much by raising our omega-3 levels too high, this can actually have an effect on inflammation itself. So we can actually dampen down the inflammatory response a little bit too much. So we have to be a little bit careful. And then that comes around to sort of how much omega-3 we're actually taking. One of the sort of potential benefits of taking omega-3 supplements is the fact that it inhibits the pro-inflammatory properties of arachidonic acid, and they actually displace arachidonic acid from cell membranes as well. So if we take large amounts of omega-3 and we displace arachidonic acid, then we see a fall in arachidonic acid levels, and it's all relative to actually how much omega-3 we're actually taking and how much omega-3 we take for how long. Initially, when we take small amounts of omega-3, we see arachidonic acid levels rise. It's not until we've been taking high levels of omega-3 for a long period of time that we actually see a fall in arachidonic acid levels. So we have to be a little bit careful about how much omega-3 we actually do take. And this kind of then brings us back round to the benefits of identifying an individual's fatty acid status, to be able to identify a client's personal omega-3 and omega-6 requirements. Because generally, we find that, certainly through our kind of experience of using the Optio3 biomarker test, that quite a lot of us have very high levels of arachidonic acid, but it's not always the case. And I really wanted to sort of just go over a quick example here of how low levels of arachidonic acid can actually give slightly misleading sort of results when it comes to looking at biomarker analysis. So for those of you who are a little bit new to Igennus, or if you don't know our Optio3 biomarker test, our biomarker test is a blood spot test. So we take some blood, or take some blood from you or from your client. We do a full fatty acid screen, and then we use the EPA and DHA to give indication of your omega-3 index, which tells you how much omega-3 EPA and DHA is actually within your cell membranes. And then we identify the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, and primarily we focus on the AA to EPA ratio as a biomarker of inflammation. Ideally, we would like to see an omega-3 index of over 8%, and in this occasion, we see something that is relatively common, and this 40-year-old female presented with an omega-3 index of 3.44%. Now, normally when we see an omega-3 index this low, we would see a corresponding high AA to EPA ratio, anywhere between sort of 6 and 10%. But in this case, the client has an AA to EPA ratio of 2.51, which would actually indicate that her inflammatory balance is relatively okay, as it were. But when we actually look at the level of arachidonic acid, so if we go down to AA here, sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down, we see that in this case the arachidonic acid levels are actually relatively low at 5%. Normally you would see a arachidonic acid of between maybe sort of 10, 14%. So quite why this client has such a low arachidonic acid level, I'm not quite sure. But what is happening here is that it's giving us the indication based on an EPA content of 2% that the AA to EPA ratio is actually sort of in a kind of an acceptable range. So we ideally want to see an AA to EPA ratio about 1.5, but anywhere between sort of 1 and 3 is relatively okay. But in this case, what appears to be quite prevalent is that if this client has a very low arachidonic acid level, it may be that this will impact on her ability to resolve inflammation, because as I was saying earlier, you actually need relatively higher amounts than this of arachidonic acid to be able to initiate a sort of pro-resolving response to inflammation. So in this case, we would probably recommend that she would take some GLA alongside EPA and DHA, which would then help to maintain healthier levels of arachidonic acid, because GLA will give rise to arachidonic acid, but the EPA and DHA combination will help to support the omega-3 index. So quite often we see quite high levels of AA to EPA, and we would recommend pure EPA. And obviously, you know, for those of you who know us, you know that Igennus put a lot of focus on pure EPA or high EPA, but we do get asked quite a lot about high dose DHA supplements, because, you know, if we go into our health stores, if we go online these days, we do see a lot of manufacturers or, you know, other companies that actually do supply a lot of products that are high in DHA. So when do we need DHA? When do we need EPA? And what's the kind of ratio that we should be really looking for? So when do we need one? When do we need the other? And I guess sometimes people say to me, which one is best? And I think that that's actually a really hard question to answer, because I don't think there's a black and white kind of answer to this. And I think if we just take a bit of a look at the role of EPA and DHA in sort of lifespan and inflammation, we can get a better idea of quite why some supplements do have quite high levels of DHA. So again, you'll probably have seen this lovely little diagram in some of our previous webinars, and there's a lot of focus really on utilizing the AA to EPA ratio alongside the omega-3 index to give us an overall view of a person's health status. So the omega-3 index gives us a structural idea of what's going on, and we, like I said before, we should be aiming to get or to achieve an omega-3 index of about 8%. Achieving an omega-3 index of 8% significantly reduces our risk of developing a number of health conditions. But this is alongside actually having a balanced AA to EPA ratio. So in combination, these two biomarkers give us a really good overview of somebody's health. So if you have an AA to EPA ratio between sort of 1 to 1.5, and an omega-3 index of 8%, then you're relatively healthy when it comes to looking at omega-3s and inflammation. Now, EPA and DHA can be kind of split up. So these are two very different fatty acids. They have very different functions. DHA is primarily structural. It also gives rise to its own little family of anti-inflammatory docosanoids, and it gives rise to pro-resolving products. But what's unique about EPA is that it has this wonderful relationship, this wonderful antagonistic relationship with arachidonic acid that doesn't really exist between arachidonic acid and DHA. So when we look at our omega-3 index, and we have to take on board that some of that omega-3 index is some of that omega-3 index is DHA and some of it is EPA, we need to have enough structural DHA to be able to maintain cell structure and cell membrane integrity. And we need to have enough EPA to be able to combat the pro-inflammatory mechanisms and products that are derived from arachidonic acid. So when we look at DHA, we really need to be focusing on cell structure. And when we look at DHA, we look at pregnancy, we look at the developing brain. We need to have adequate amounts of DHA very early on. So we know that if women don't go into pregnancy well nourished, if they don't go in with healthy levels of omega-3, that this can have consequences within the developing brain. So normal growth and development of the developing fetus can be significantly impaired if you don't have substantial amounts of DHA. And in fact, actually having substantial amounts of EPA and DHA is very important during pregnancy anyway. So we'll probably be covering that area in a different webinar in the future next year. But anyway, so we see this sort of growth spurt within the fetal brain and then onwards afterwards as well. So further growth spurts are believed to occur between 2 or 4 years, 6 to 8 years, and everything kind of starts to settle down a little bit. And DHA tends to sort of stay latched into our cell membranes, whereas EPA gets utilized very rapidly. And if we look at the sort of EFSA guidelines for DHA requirements, we can see that we need a minimum of about 200 milligrams during pregnancy, and for infants and children for sort of brain, eye development and function. This is the primary fatty acid found in the brain and the eye. It's also found in abundance in cardiovascular tissue as well. So we need to maintain adequate amounts of DHA during various life stages to look after our cell membranes in regards to sort of maternal health and outcomes, brain and eye, cardiovascular, visual cognition, and that kind of area. As we get a little bit older, we need a little bit more. And we know that low DHA levels are associated with an increased risk of developing cognitive decline, dementia, age-related macular degeneration, and so on. We generally find it a lot harder to displace DHA than we do EPA. And in fact, if we look at, we'll move on from that one. If we look at, oh, I've gone a bit too far, right, okay. Okay, so yes, sorry, I beg your pardon. So we have these requirements for DHA, and then what I was going to do was move on and try to sort of clarify some of the areas of what happens when we supplement. So the whole kind of EPA DHA supplemental regime can be quite difficult to sort of get your head round if we don't understand what kind of happens when we do supplement. So if we look at the sort of pathway, so we have ALA, which is our plant-sourced short-chain omega-3. If we only supplement with short-chain fatty acids, then we're relying on the body to make all these conversions through delta-6 desaturase and elongases and delta-5 desaturase and so on to be able to incorporate EPA, which then gives rise to DPA, which then gives rise to DHA. So we have this wonderful long pathway down to the accumulation of EPA and DHA. When we get there, everything becomes quite complicated. And we know that EPA has the ability to convert to DPA. DPA acts as a reservoir for EPA, so it can retro-convert back. So there's this wonderful little arrow going from DPA to EPA. And then DHA also has the ability to retro-convert back to EPA. There seems to be a bit of a block when it comes to supplementation, that EPA, the ability of EPA to convert to DHA is still really needs to be kind of clarified. We're not quite sure exactly what the conversion rate from EPA to DHA is. Now, some studies show that EPA minimally converts to DHA. And other studies show that EPA does convert quite well to DHA. And it appears to be dependent on DHA status. So if we have adequate amounts of DHA within our cell membranes, then the cell membrane becomes saturated. We don't want to have too much DHA in our cell membranes because they become over fluidy, if that kind of makes sense to people. So the purpose of DHA within cell membranes, because of the structure of DHA, is to provide this sort of liquid, sort of fluid environment for proteins and channels to be able to move around efficiently. You don't want your cell membranes to be too saturated, but you don't want them to be too fluid either. So it's getting this sort of nice balance of adequate levels of DHA. And the body has this wonderful way of ensuring that our DHA levels are well maintained. So quite often we find that EPA may not convert to DHA if we have adequate levels of DHA. So the sort of concept of supplementing with excessive amounts of DHA doesn't really kind of make sense. And in fact, a lot of the DHA that we take in DHA supplements actually converts back, so it retro-converts back to EPA. And there have been numerous DHA studies, pure DHA studies, that have suggested that some of the outcomes that, or some of the sort of positive outcomes that are observed are actually due to retro-conversion of DHA back to EPA. Because obviously it's EPA that's having this sort of downstream sort of impact on inflammatory processes more so than DHA. So when it comes to DHA supplementation, I think again it's not a black and white, it's not as simple as a black and white sort of answer, but there is evidence to suggest that supplementing with high doses of DHA just isn't always necessarily needed. And that because EPA levels, and we know that EPA is used up on a very regular, and especially if there's sort of a lot of inflammation going on, EPA usage is much higher than DHA. So it makes sense that supplementation should have a higher EPA to DHA ratio to support the body's requirements of both. Which leads us into this wonderful question of, is there an optimal EPA to DHA ratio? And do you know what, I really wish I could just say yes, and it is this, but it's, again, it's not that black and white. But a lot of it can be answered, and this is really interesting now. So supplementing with EPA and DHA is quite profound when we start to look at how the body utilizes and takes up EPA and DHA. So EPA and DHA get incorporated into phospholipids, which make up our cell membranes, but they don't just kind of randomly just sort of interject into cell membranes. They are incorporated very specifically, and they incorporate into very specific phospholipids. So phosphatidylcholine, for example, so this little PC, is located mainly in the outer membrane, whereas ethanolamide, is primarily on the inside of the cell membrane. So, and the structure is very different, and it's the incorporation into PE on the inside of the cell membrane that actually gives it the sort of bendiness. So because it forms this sort of like cone-like shape. The PE rather than PC tends to give the sort of curvature of the cell membranes. Now, when we look at EPA and DHA, what we find is that EPA tends to incorporate into phospholipids on the outside of the cell membrane, but a little bit on the inside. And DHA is preferentially incorporated into the phospholipids that are found inside the cell membrane. Now, there are two reasons for this, and one of them I've obviously mentioned in regards to how this impacts on the sort of cell structure itself, giving it this wonderful curvature. But we also have to consider that because DHA is the longest of the omega-3 supplements, omega-3 fatty acids, and it has numerous double bonds, it's actually also very easily oxidized. And so by incorporating onto the inside of the cell membrane, actually protects it to some extent from the sort of impact of oxidation. So it preserves DHA. But the distribution of DHA within the inside sheet of the cell membrane also accounts for its slower removal. So it just sits snugly on the inside of the cell membrane, giving the cell membrane its nice structure, and so it's much harder to actually get rid of. Whereas EPA, which is on the outside of the cell membrane, is accessible by phospholipases, and it gets snipped out of cell membranes quite easily, where it goes off and sort of does all its wonderful anti-inflammatory reactions throughout the body. So that's the first thing to take on board, is how EPA and DHA are incorporated. And so when we look at studies that show the effects of stopping omega-3 supplementation, for example, we find that after, say, a period of, so this is an example of healthy volunteers who were given fish oil. So it was a combination of EPA and DHA for 12 weeks, and then there was an 8-week washout. So they were receiving no omega-3s. And what we find is there is this clear decline very quickly in EPA. And whilst DHA levels do go down a little bit as well, we do find that DHA incorporation tends to be held a lot stiffly. So we find that we retain DHA a lot more effectively than we do EPA. And again, there's another kind of example here as well. But again, this is a slide that we've used before, and it's very similar to the previous slide. But what we find also that is very specific to DHA is that if you take high levels of DHA, you actually naturally reduce delta-6 desaturase activity. So this is the first enzyme that is involved in this sort of like long conversion pathway from short chain to long chain. So it's like the body says, okay, right, I've got adequate amounts of DHA within my cell membrane. I don't want to become oversaturated, so I'm going to shut down the body's mechanism to create more. Okay, so there is, I mean, again, there is evidence as well that DHA supplementation, pure DHA, doesn't necessarily give us the kind of benefits that we see taking pure EPA. So there's a very clear difference between EPA and DHA, not only in regards to cellular uptake, but how it's retained, and then the effects that it have, or that these fatty acids actually have on the body. And then we find that this relates through into sort of like larger clinical studies. For example, if we look at one of the sort of most well documented really for using EPA over DHA is the use in treating clinical depression, for example. So we now know that EPA in excess of DHA is really vital if we want to see benefits from supplementation for the treatment of clinical depression. And this is very similar for other sort of neurodevelopmental issues as well, and also in areas such as bipolar, schizophrenia. There's this same pattern of high EPA being effective and high DHA being ineffective. So again, over the last few years, we've started seeing a lot more studies coming out that are kind of reporting anti-inflammatory benefits from different ratios of EPA to DHA. So using different fish oils with different ratios. And so just kind of quoting a couple that we sort of came across recently. So in animal studies, an EPA ratio of EPA to DHA of 2:1 has been shown to be more effective at producing anti-inflammatory responses, so reducing inflammatory cytokines, inflammatory biomarkers, than ratios where DHA is higher than EPA. And in human studies, we've found that a ratio of 6:1 of EPA and DHA, that I think the paper actually quotes that it may be optimal for correcting both omega-3 deficiencies and for having positive effects on lipid profiles, so cholesterol, triglycerides, and on reducing pro-inflammatory biomarkers as well. So really the outcome tends to sort of point us towards this story of EPA in excess of DHA appears to be optimal. The exact ratio we're not quite sure of yet, and I think that we need a lot more well-balanced, well-developed, well-set-out clinical studies to really kind of identify. And I think as well we have to take on board that you know, there are different effects at different tissues, different incorporations at different tissues, and so to just have a few studies giving us a few kind of indications of the various ratios, I think is not enough for us to have this sort of overall idea of exactly what is going on. But the story for the moment is that if you want to reduce inflammation, then pure EPA, and certainly EPA in excess of DHA, appears to work more favorably than either pure DHA or high DHA to EPA. And again, it's quite interesting that actually if you convert, if you supplement with DHA, quite a lot of it, as much as 13% of DHA, gets retroconverted anyway. So the other option, obviously, is if you have a client and you're not quite sure what's going on, is to test their biomarkers, test their fatty acid levels. We need to take on board omega-6 and omega-3. So we need to look at EPA and DHA and arachidonic acid and get the whole kind of story of exactly what's going on. And there may be cases that if DHA levels are low, then we may need to top those DHA levels up. But if we don't test, we don't know. So I think somebody asked us this the other day, actually, which is why we've included it, because we touched on this again in a previous webinar. We mentioned the fact that actually in the, I was going to say the right atmosphere, but it actually is the complete opposite, really. In the wrong atmosphere, in compromised individuals, there may be an issue with high-strength omega-3 fatty acids actually increasing inflammation rather than reducing inflammation. And that's exactly the thing that you really don't want to be doing with your client. So again, actually, testing their levels can be really useful for identifying their personal requirements. But we're just going to have a little chat now about the issue of omega-3s possibly increasing inflammation. Like I said, some of you have probably heard a little bit about this from one of our previous webinars, and really the whole kind of inflammatory issue seems to be focused on the area of DHA rather than EPA. And again, as I was sort of highlighting earlier, DHA has multiple double bonds, so it's really highly susceptible to oxidative damage, and that's okay. If you're, if you've got your DHA and it's sitting nicely inside your cell membrane, on the inside leaf of your cell membrane, it's relatively protected. If you supplement with high levels of DHA and your cell membranes are saturated, then you're going to be having surplus amounts of DHA kind of floating around, which are going to be susceptible to oxidative damage, especially if you don't have enough antioxidants, enough antioxidant enzymes to be able to sort of support and manage oxidative sort of capacity within the body. So studies are now kind of coming out and showing us that DHA has both antioxidant and pro-oxidant effects. And these are dependent on whether you take DHA at either high or low levels. So if we take small amounts of DHA, DHA has actually been shown to lower lipid peroxidation, and it's generally incorporated into the inside of our cell membrane, so that's fine. But if we have surplus amounts of DHA, as I've said, it is forced to incorporate into phosphatidylcholine on the outside of the cell membrane. It is then exposed to the kind of elements, as it were, and it becomes pro-oxidative, exhibiting pro-inflammatory effects. So therefore, DHA has very different effects on cell function depending on how it's accumulated and where it's accumulated. And a lot of this is dependent on how much DHA we're actually taking, and also on sort of, as I've said, you know, whether we are sort of compromised individuals. So if you've got somebody who's highly inflamed to start with, then their sort of antioxidant capacity is actually going to be probably compromised and low. So if you then flood the system with lots of sort of highly lots of DHA, which is susceptible to oxidative damage, then you're going to exacerbate the symptoms in that individual. So again, we have to be a little bit careful about these things. And again, this is a slide that I've used previously, but it does kind of clarify things a little bit. So normally we have our AA, EPA and DHA that are converted through enzymic pathways to these wonderful little products called eicosanoids and docosanoids, and they can be either inflammatory or in the case of arachidonic acid, they can be inflammatory. EPA is obviously anti-inflammatory. DHA can be anti-inflammatory and offers neuroprotection as well. But under the wrong conditions, if we have very high levels of inflammation already and we have very low antioxidant capacity, then taking all of these fatty acids can actually give rise non-enzymatically to a rather large range of pro-inflammatory products as well. So we have to be a little bit careful about how much omega-3 we actually give as well, and how much DHA we give. It kind of leads me into sort of just having a little mention about krill as well, because there's a lot of sort of favourable opinions on the use of krill as a source of omega-3 fatty acids. But I think that krill gives me a wonderful opportunity to highlight the importance of omega-3 and the importance of kind of dosing when it comes to antioxidant capacity. So if we look at krill oil, it has a really high content of this wonderful antioxidant astaxanthin. Astaxanthin is it's quite a unique antioxidant in that it kind of manages to burrow a cell through its structure into the outside leaf and the inside leaf of cell membranes. So it's a very unique antioxidant, and it's found in very high levels in krill because it functions to protect the free fatty acids that are found in krill oil. So so whilst krill oil can be rather beneficial in regards to an antioxidant benefits, its omega-3 content is still quite low anyway. But I'm going to talk about that in a minute because that's something that we have been asked about too. So the idea, or answering the question of can omega-3s be pro-inflammatory, the answer is yes, they can be under certain conditions. So more so in sort of like nutritionally compromised individuals. So if you're not eating your 5 a day, if you're not getting loads of flavonoids and polyphenols and vitamins and minerals, everything that is involved in regulating inflammation and regulating sort of antioxidant sort of pathways, then flooding the body with lots of omega-3 may actually be rather detrimental in some cases. So now we'll just sort of cover how we can kind of overcome that as well. But not before I just show you one quick slide. And this is just to really kind of highlight again that when we think about DHA, and we think about DHA in regards to something like cognitive decline, there's a lot of evidence out there that suggests that actually DHA is really, really beneficial. However, under the wrong circumstances, DHA can actually exacerbate pathways that are involved in sort of amyloid beta progression, if you like, as an example of sort of Alzheimer's disease. So if you have oxidized DHA, it actually upregulates some of the enzymes that are involved in amyloid beta production. So we have to be very, very careful. And sometimes sort of the whole kind of inflammatory pathways that can arise from high strength omega-3 DHA can actually sort of blind or mask some of the outcomes of some of the studies that are actually published. So again, it's all about structuring a lot of these trials adequately to be able to, to sort of create the best environment for a nutritional kind of intervention to actually work. So always, in our opinion, if you have a client who is at a high risk, so compromised in regards to sort of antioxidant status, or if they're already highly inflamed, then okay, we always recommend omega-3 to be combined with appropriate levels of antioxidants, and this is to help preserve antioxidant status down this sort of like long line of various sort of different pathways. So yeah, we have to be a little bit careful. And then again, this sort of leads us on to the status of your fish oil to start with as well. So we have heard a fair amount in the last few years actually about fish oils and rancidity of fish oils, and if your fish oil is rancid, then it's going to do this and it's going to be pro-inflammatory. And yes, absolutely. So we have to be very careful about the purity and the grade of the fish oil that we use with our clients. And at Igennus, we pride ourselves for having absolute best in terms of grade and purity and safety of all the oils that we actually use. And if you want to know about omega-3s and the sort of oxidative capacity of those omega-3s, then you need to look at something called the TOTOX value. Because as I've said, so omega-3s, or in fact all oils that have got sort of multiple double bonds, are prone to degradation. So they, as soon as they come in exposure to oxygen, they will start to degrade. And we can measure something called the peroxide value within a fish oil or any oil. And the peroxide value gives us an indication of the primary oxidative products. So our fish oils will give rise to primary oxidative products. And a lot of fish oil supplements will give you an indication of how many, or the value of the peroxide value. And the maximum value that we know is permittable is a value of 5. However, over time, some of those peroxide end products, primary oxidation products, actually degrade again to give secondary oxidation products, which are even nastier than the primary oxidative products. And so unless you sort of do this sort of like little mathematical equation, take into account both secondary and primary, then you're not really going to know the true status of how clean and safe your oil is. So the TOTOX value is this wonderful little calculation that takes on board both primary and secondary oxidation products, and the maximum value that is permitted is 26. So we pride ourselves at Igennus, so all of our raw oils, we don't accept anything that has a TOTOX value of over 10 before we even kind of go anywhere near sort of turning it into fish oil supplements themselves. So all of our fish oils are going to have really safe TOTOX calculations, profiles, and so on. So you can be guaranteed that your clients will be taking the safest fish oil possible. And given that our Farm-EPA Restore is actually being used in an ongoing clinical study where it's obviously going to be very, very, very necessary for it to be have a safe profile. Kind of speaks high volumes of all of our products, really. Oh, so yes. So to overcome some of the issues that may arise, possibly from the potential damaging effects that can come from secondary, primary oxidative products and so on. Unlike many of our competitors, we really think about how and when to dose. So we always use as smaller capsules as possible. So it's very tempting to sort of go, let's go high dose, let's put everything into one capsule, make it a really easy 1 a day dosing, which seems to be sort of favoritized by quite a lot of our competitors. We say, no, we're going to keep our capsules small. That only not only does that actually make them very easy to swallow, but it actually encourages and highlights the importance of split dosing. So we're not really equipped to be able to sort of take in mega doses of omega-3 fatty acids. So small capsules, split dose, take them over the day, and not only is incorporation going to be more not only is incorporation going to be better, but you're going to get adequate levels throughout the day. So it's really important, the smaller capsules, and split dosing again. So we totally encourage individuals to distribute their fatty acids throughout the day. And to take these with food as well. So you shouldn't really take omega-3 fatty acids on an empty stomach. Taking them with food, ideally, if there's a little bit of fat there as well, it increases the body's natural ability to digest and absorb the fatty acids. So when we digest any kind of fat, we need to produce lipases, we need to produce various sort of enzymes that are involved in breaking down fatty acids, and that is stimulated by fat. So if we have a little bit of fat in our diet and we take our omega-3s, we will be able to digest them and absorb them a lot more efficiently. So small capsules, split dose, take them with food, and take alongside an antioxidant. So we obviously include vitamin E in all of our products, and this protects fatty acids from oxidation, both pre and post digestion. But we do kind of advise this sort of synergistic antioxidant taken alongside as well. And so we recommend our Restore and Maintain for optimizing omega-3 fatty acid levels and for optimizing AA to EPA ratio. But we also have a wonderful, the best antioxidant that we know of, vesisulbubiquinol. Not only does it help with sort of energy levels, so CoQ10 is obviously involved in mitochondrial energy production, but it actually is one of the most potent antioxidants that you'll be able to find. Not only does it act as an antioxidant, but it recycles other antioxidants as well, so vitamin E, vitamin C, lipoic acid. So it's a wonderful add-on. And then I've just sort of kicked in a little bit of a super B complex as well. That supports methylation and transsulfation, so it looks after sort of detox pathways if you've got high levels of inflammation. So we go for this kind of synergistic benefits from all of our supplements. And we know, and this is a lovely slide, I do like this one. This was presented this in my neurocognitive health webinar a little while ago, talking about synergistic benefits. So this was sort of like focusing on looking at the Mediterranean style diet, and it's not just about plucking one ingredient from one source. So it's about looking at the synergistic benefits of individual nutrients from individual foods and then sort of combining them together. So again, we look at studies. We don't really have concrete, kind of comprehensive ideas of exactly what it is from one particular area, but we do know that quite often, and we find this in some of the sort of studies that are coming out. For example, there was a nice study published earlier this year, I believe, that was saying that in regards to sort of cognitive function and looking after homocysteine levels, individuals who had higher levels of omega-3 within the brain actually found that supplementing with folate and B12 and B6 was a lot more effective. So there's this sort of synergistic sort of relationship that's going on, and this is kind of where we're beginning to focus a little bit more. We understand that omega-3 fatty acids play a really vital role in regulating inflammation, and that low levels of omega-3 are relate through to increased risk of a number of different areas of chronic disease. But we also realize that there are other nutrients as well that are really important for sort of co-supplementing. And then again, okay, this is stemming from a conversation again about krill oil. And I think the marketing behind krill oil has started to sort of decline slightly. A few years ago, it was on the television all over the place, and it was, you know, krill oil was going to be the answer to everybody's cardiovascular health. Yet some of the studies that have really kind of come out looking at bioavailability really haven't kind of backed up the sort of marketing spiel that's sort of come out of it. So we are actually asked quite often, you know, what's the best form of omega-3 to take, not only sort of ethically, financially, but therapeutically as well. For those of you who have known Igennus for, you know, last few years, even, you know, we've been going around for 10 years now, and originally we brought out products in ethyl ester form. Over the years, obviously, the sort of technology has improved, and now we have both ethyl ester and we have RTG, so our Mind Care range, our Restore and Maintain, Omega Flex, all of our products are sort of moving over to re-esterified triglyceride. And the reason for this is simply because RTG is well known now to increase levels of omega-3 more effectively than any other form of omega-3 form. So just to sort of clarify, you know, 10 years ago, if you wanted to concentrate an oil, you had to strip away the fatty acids that you weren't interested in. So triglycerides, they come around, you've got one long chain omega-3 fatty acid and you've got two other fatty acids, monounsaturated or saturated, that you're not really interested in. So to concentrate that oil, you disregard the glycerol backbone, you disregard the fatty acids that you don't really want in your supplement, and then you're just left with the omega-3 of interest. To stabilize it, you pop a little ethyl ester on there, and Bob's your uncle, you've got a nice concentrated omega-3 supplement. Over the years, technology has improved, and we are now able to add that glycerol backbone back on, which significantly improves the bioavailability. So the potential issue with ethyl esters is that without the glycerol backbone, once they're absorbed, they struggle to incorporate or re-esterify themselves back into triglyceride form. Not so much of a problem if you are consuming your ethyl ester fatty acids with fat in your diet, which significantly improves the bioavailability and kind of overcomes it. But if you were to take your supplements on an empty stomach, this is the kind of incorporation that you would see. So RTG is the most favorable, and you've got standard fish body oil, you've got cod liver oil, you've got free fatty acids, and then you've got ethyl ester. So this was it's a very well-known study, to be honest, and it even shows that actually in the RTG capsule, you actually had less omega-3 than in some of the other ones. So it delivers the biggest increase in lipid content, lowest volume of oil, and the lowest dose of EPA and DHA. So it's a winner, in our opinion. The only fatty acid that it doesn't mention in this START trial was phospholipids from krill oil. And obviously, one of the reasons that krill oil has been sort of so highly regarded in regards to sort of bioavailability is that it, unlike triglycerides, actually incorporates fatty acids into phospholipids. Phospholipids are what are the structure of the fatty acids that are incorporated into our cell membrane. So you would naturally expect something that is a phospholipid to be more bioavailable than something that is in a triglyceride. And that's a fair enough statement. Oh, and this is just a little diagram of my astaxanthin molecule that I was talking about earlier. So as you can see, it's got two water-loving polar ends, so it sits really nicely within the cell membrane, protecting your phospholipids in krill oil nicely from oxidation. So our phospholipids are highly bioavailable, and so the whole emphasis of krill oil was, well, it's highly bioavailable, so you don't have to take as much. Now, one of the biggest issues with krill oil, obviously, is that the concentration of EPA and DHA within krill is actually really, really low. It's something like sort of 20%, 24% maximum, whereas you know, even standard fish body oil is about 30%, and then you've got your concentrated omega-3 supplements, which, you know, offer you anything up to sort of like 90%, like our Farm EPA Restore. And so, and I gave a krill bioavailability webinar, I think earlier this year or even late last year, actually. And basically, there have been several different studies that have looked at krill oil bioavailability. Some of them have been sort of like for like, others have compared the same amounts of krill with less fish oil. Some have looked at RTG and ethyl esters. But the outcome really of all of these studies is that along the line, actually, you have to take an awful lot of krill oil to achieve the same kind of cellular levels of omega-3 than sort of even a standard fish oil, let alone a more concentrated one. So it's really kind of concluded that at the moment, that there is no evidence that there is any greater bioavailability of krill oil versus fish oil. And that really, to be honest with you, you really need more carefully controlled human trials to really establish their relative efficiencies after chronic administration, certainly. So, you know, if you want to use krill oil as an add-on to offer some sort of like anti-inflammatory benefits in regards to the astaxanthin dose, that's fine. If you're using it as a method of increasing omega-3 fatty acids, then I would suggest that it's very costly because you would have to take an awful lot. The other option, the other side of krill oil, obviously, is that you are restricted in the sort of EPA DHA ratio within the krill oil. Unlike fish oils, you can actually create or concentrate pure EPA or pure DHA, whichever you're interested in. But with krill, it tends to be sort of very, very standard. And then again, really to sort of emphasize it, this was the study that was, gosh, it's 2 years old now. This was a wonderful study because it kind of really set out to say, right, okay, so we go into our health store, we pick up our box, and on the box it says 2 capsules a day, or 4 capsules a day, or in the case of krill oil, it was actually 1 capsule a day. And this study really kind of set out, and they said, right, okay, so if we follow the manufacturer's recommended dose, what happens in regards to biomarkers of cardiovascular health? So they looked at AA to EPA ratio, and they looked at the omega-3 index, and they dosed according to the manufacturer's recommendations. So they looked at 2 concentrated oils. One was RTG, one was in ethyl ester. They then took a standard kind of fish body oil, so salmon oil, and they took a krill oil. And you can see that there are really big mega differences between the doses offered by different manufacturers' supplements. So you would kind of expect that if you're getting a lot more omega-3 in your concentrated fish oil, then it's going to have better effects than your small amount of omega-3 offered by your krill oil, which is exactly the case, and I'll show you the slides in just a minute. But this is really kind of emphasizing that if you're going into a store, if you're going into a health store, if you're buying something online and you are relying on the box telling you that to take 2 capsules a day, you're assuming that that supplement is going to have some kind of health outcomes. Whereas the kind of more personalized approach to sort of supplementing really kind of says, right, okay, so what are my clients' baseline levels? How much does my client need? But if we just look very quickly at the impact that these four fish oils actually had. So the first one really looked at the change in the omega-3 index. So the blue line is our concentrated RTG, which increased the omega-3 index from just over 4 to just under 7. Our concentrated ethyl ester, delivering similar amounts of omega-3, raised the omega-3 index from just over 4 to just under 6, I think there. And as you can see, both the salmon oil and the krill oil really didn't have that much of an impact on the omega-3 index. So if you're taking a product that has low levels of omega-3 and you're following the recommended dose on the packet, then you may well be disappointed in terms of clinical effects. And then again, very simply, the impact that these 4 supplements actually had on reducing the AA to EPA ratio, so decreasing inflammatory potential. And again, very similar outcomes for our concentrated fish oils. And whilst the salmon oil and the krill oil reduced the AA to EPA ratio, it really isn't very significant. So if you want clinical benefit, you have to take the concentrated oil, and you have to take it in a relatively high amount, so at least 1 gram. And what's interesting, actually, if we just go back, was that even at, I think it was about, let me see, okay, so the concentrated fish oil is offering just over 1 gram, the ethyl ester is just under 1 gram, but even at those doses, nobody actually achieved an omega-3 index of 8%. So you still need to take a little bit more. So I would suggest for an average individual to be looking at least 1 gram to 1.5 grams a day. Which kind of leads me into, when would you recommend using the Optio3? And I think really from sort of everything that I'm talking about here is, you know, the Optio3 provides a wonderful insight to a client's personal requirements. If you know the baseline levels of your client, then you'll be able to advise them accordingly. You'll be able to tell them exactly how much omega-3 that they need. You'll be able to monitor how much omega-6 that they need, and you'll be able to offer them a personalised protocol, really. So we know that dose response studies show us that high doses of omega-3 are required to reduce the AA to EPA ratio and to achieve an omega-3 index of more than 8%. But a lot of it is determined by your client's starting levels. So if you've got a client with an omega-3 index of less than 4%, they're going to need more omega-3s than they will if they've got an omega-3 index of 6%. And then we have to sort of take on board the whole kind of ratios of 6 to 3 and AA to EPA to determine whether we need to go for pure EPA to really combat high levels of inflammation. So if you've got a very high AA to EPA ratio, you really need to go in for at least 3 months with pure EPA to manage that inflammatory ratio. If your client's levels of AA and EPA are actually relatively okay, but their omega-3 index is low, then we need to go in with maintain. So we need to incorporate the benefits of GLA and DHA on top of our EPA. So we can really kind of determine from using the Optio3 in individuals' specific requirements. And then I just kind of, I actually drew these little diagrams relatively recently in the last couple of weeks, really just to kind of give you an idea of exactly kind of what's going on. So this is to sort of emphasize really the differences between AA to EPA ratio and EPA and DHA levels. So, and again, to sort of emphasize when and where it is appropriate to go core EPA over DHA. So if we, for example, suggest that in these sort of series of 5 examples that our AA to EPA, our AA levels, are relatively stable at about 10%, and our omega-3 index in A is 4, 1% of that is just EPA, then our AA to EPA ratio is going to be 10. So we're going to have a low omega-3 index and we're going to have a high AA to EPA ratio. And then we can kind of progress along to number E, where we've got an omega-3 index of 8% and our AA to EPA ratio is only 2. And that's pretty ideal, really. That's kind of what we should be aiming for. This is because our EPA is higher than DHA. So if we were to have higher levels of DHA, then our omega-3 index, which will eventually saturate once we, if we carry on increasing our omega-3 intake, then our omega-3 index will sort of reach saturation at some point. But if the majority of your omega-3 index is DHA, then you're still not going to achieve kind of an ideal AA to EPA ratio. So you can get it down, but depending on the AA levels in the first place, you may want to sort of consider exactly how much DHA is there, how much EPA is there in relation to arachidonic acid. And I'm using 10% arachidonic acid as an example here. Quite a lot of the clients that we see actually have AA levels of much higher than that. So quite often we see AA to EPA ratios anywhere up to sort of like 20%. And so I would suggest we need to be looking at how much DHA we have structurally to start with. If your levels are sort of less than 2%, then you need a little bit of DHA in there to sort of top those up. But if you've got nice healthy levels of DHA, then you need a lot more EPA to not only increase the omega-3 index, but to actually optimize our AA to EPA ratio. And that's the nice thing about Farm EPA Restore and Maintain. So I won't go into these slides in huge detail. You'll have access to these afterwards, but this is a really useful way of sort of summarizing how well we can optimize our biomarkers using Farm EPA Restore and Maintain. So we have pure EPA, and then we have EPA, DHA and GLA, and we can mix and match to create ideal EPA to DHA ratios, and we can work out how much omega-3 we actually need, because obviously one of the benefits of the Optio3 biomarker test is that it takes your client's body weight and omega-3 starting levels, and it gives you an indication of how much omega-3 they need. But using these charts, we can sort of have a better sort of clarification of what kind of supplementation we need to sort of go in. So generally, where we have high levels of AA to EPA, then we kind of say, you blitz that initially for the first 3 months with a pure EPA or at least a high EPA, and we can mix and match really nicely. So you can blend, restore and maintain to achieve omega-3 levels of your requirements and to achieve an EPA DHA that is favorable to your client. So that's kind of a sort of summary of some majority of the questions that we were kind of asked, really. A lot of them have come from sort of previous webinars and sort of questions that we sort of come across on the phones day to day, questions that we get sort of in the emails from practitioners and sort of general public as well. So I hope you found that helpful. What I'm going to do now really is sort of start leading out of the webinars, just give you a little update of our Food Matters Live talk that we gave in November. So I know that some of you made it to Food Matters Live, and it was nice to see you there. For those who didn't, we were invited to talk on the subject of omega-3 fatty acids in cancer prevention and treatment, and it was a delightful day, and we had a lot of really positive feedback from new clients, new practitioners. And yeah, it was a really exciting day. We're hoping to go back and speak again next year. But the sort of summary really of omega-3s in cancer for us was partly from our fairly recent collaboration over the last couple of years with Mark Hull and his seafood polyp prevention trial, which I'll just talk about in just a second. So, yeah, we went to Food Matters Live, and I talked about the benefits of omega-3, went through a little bit of the evidence of a role of omega-3 in cancer. We know that, obviously, you know, diet and cancer has long been known to be associated with increased risk of cancer or poor diet. We know that fish consumption relates through to sort of cancer prevention. So if you eat relatively small amounts of fish, can have a protective effect. But when it comes to omega-3 and cancer, we know that inflammation is at the core of just about every part of the sort of tumorigenesis itself. So anywhere from tumor initiation, progression to growth. With huge amounts of experimental evidence showing that omega-3s have anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer activities, and recent studies looking at the benefits and roles of omega-3 fatty acids in both prevention and treatment. So cancer cachexia, for example, and also omega-3s actually as playing a role in the enhancement of many anti-tumor therapies. So it's a really exciting area actually at the moment. And this, I love this slide, I have to say. It just kind of summarizes everything in regards to sort of omega-3, and really it kind of emphasizes this sort of role that we talk about so much, this synergistic relationship, this antagonistic relationship, sorry, that occurs between AA and EPA in regards to pro and anti-inflammatory. And we know that inflammation creates this wonderful kind of tumor and microenvironment with this sort of enabling characteristic of cancer in sort of regards to sort of proliferation, survival, migration, angiogenesis, and so on. So high levels of arachidonic acid within the tumor microenvironment will create this rather extensive pro-inflammatory environment, increases cancer risk, increases cancer progression. If you increase EPA, it really is as simple as that. If you balance it out, if you can reduce the AA to EPA ratio by high strength EPA supplements, you can actually reduce cancer risk, you can reduce cancer progression, and you get better outcomes. And we are seeing this in more and more clinical studies. And it's not really surprising given the role of a lot of the drugs that we already see that target arachidonic acid as well. So anything from non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs, leukotriene antagonists, COX-2 inhibitors, all work through modulating arachidonic acid activity. And in fact, there was a study that I quoted some years ago that actually showed that individuals who were regular users of non-steroid anti-inflammatories had a significant reduction in risk of developing a number of core cancers, including breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer, and so on. Not that I would advise anybody to sort of go out and start swallowing sort of ibuprofen overnight, because obviously it has rather nasty side effects as well. But it's just quite interesting that sort of blocking arachidonic acid activity through drugs themselves is known to have this protective role. But the interest now from a sort of nutrition point of view is that actually if we look at EPA and what it does in regards to sort of reducing phospholipase A2 activity, reducing COX-2 activity, decreasing arachidonic acid, both availability and metabolism, we actually see these sort of protective benefits just from increasing EPA. And so obviously our relationship with Mark Hull has led us into, you know, using our EPA supplements in as a chemopreventative agent in colorectal cancer. Previous studies have shown in animal models that pure EPA reduces polyp numbers in animals. In phase 2 trials, we've seen that EPA not only decreases adenoma numbers, but actually decreases adenoma size. And here we are now, phase 3, ongoing seafood polyp prevention trial, 2 grams of EPA per day over a period of 12 months. And I believe that the trial is kind of coming to a close now. So all the recruitment has taken place. The sort of results are being sort of drawn in, analysed, and I'm hoping that the results should be sort of published towards the end of next year, I believe. So it's going to be really, really interesting. And one of the kind of key areas that is even more interesting with this trial is that they are taking on board the fact that the outcome of this trial may actually be influenced by an individual's capacity to incorporate EPA. So what they're going to do, or what they have done, and what they're going to be reporting on is the ability to monitor the changes in both the omega-3 index and the AA to EPA ratio in these individuals to give an indication of those individuals who are responders. So rather than sort of like a lot of the sort of trials before these have done, is sort of like you take a group of people, you give them some omega-3, and then you look at the outcomes and you say, oh, it didn't work. But what they don't do is they don't look at the baseline levels of omega-3. They don't look at post-study levels of omega-3. So how on earth do you know if if you're using EPA or EPA and DHA as an intervention and you don't know whether it's incorporated, how can you then go on to justify a negative result by saying, oh, it didn't work? So this is what's really, really exciting about this study, is that they are going to be able to say, right, okay, so this population within this group didn't respond, that it didn't prevent adenomas, but actually it may be linked to the fact that their omega-3 index and their AA to EPA ratios didn't change. Not everybody incorporates at the same kind of rate. So it's going to really kind of clarify some really interesting areas, and hopefully sort of pave the way for sort of biomarker analysis as well. Biomarker analysis as a measure of risk and a measure of change in risk in future studies, because as I've kind of highlighted and I've continued to highlight, the emphasis on a lot of the clinical trials now is that they're beginning to recognize that actually if you don't analyze fatty acid levels, you really can't make broad statements. You have to be able to monitor changes in fatty acid levels to be able to have a or at least sort of adjust for the difference in incorporation rates. So that's quite exciting. And then another area that I kind of touched on quite briefly as well, because we were only there for about 20 minutes to sort of speak, and there's so much to say and so much that we couldn't say, but there's this huge interest at the moment as well, not only just EPA but DHA as well, on supplementing in cancer survival in cancer patients. So one of the kind of big key areas in sort of cancer treatment is that we see this change in immune status. So several clinical studies, for example, have demonstrated that immune status is this major prognostic factor for the survival time in cancer patients. Surgery, radiotherapy, chemotherapy can all induce this significant decline in the ratio of T helper cells to T suppressor cells, which affects an individual's survival rate. So if you haven't got the immune capacity, then it's going to affect how you respond, how you survive. Omega-3 supplementation, high-strength omega-3s have demonstrated this ability to decrease the ratio of T helper cells to T suppressor cells, and this results in prolonged survival time, survival of patients with cancer. So it's really important that as well, that the initiation of treatment happens at an earlier stage as possible, because again, there's evidence to suggest that the progression of cancer itself actually influences our ability to incorporate fatty acids. So again, taking on board these kind of areas within these kind of studies, we're beginning to sort of see some really interesting outcomes from some of the studies that have been published. And I think, yeah, so another area that I obviously haven't got a slide for was the use of omega-3 fatty acids in managing cancer cachexia as well. So that was quite interesting because, again, the earlier you catch this rather debilitating sort of muscle wasting condition, again driven by inflammation, the better. Some of the issues with incorporation are related to the fact that you get such a high level of muscle and adipose tissue loss, which again, given that omega-3 fatty acid omega-3 fatty acids are incorporated into both adipose tissue and skeletal muscle. If you lose those, then you're losing omega-3s. And it's been noted that omega-3 levels in cancer patients can be as much as 50% lower than in healthy individuals. So incorporating omega-3 supplementation at an early stage is really, 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 really important when it comes to the impact of omega-3 on survival time. So that was kind of Food Matters Live, and that was a great opportunity for us to talk about what we're doing in regards to our collaboration with Mark Hull and where we are with sort of, you know, our omega-3 supplements in sort of clinical trials. And so the next thing to just brief on is we brought out some really wonderful products this year, and everybody's asking us what products we're going to be seeing in 2017, and we are very, very excited about this one, I can tell you. So we've been looking at curcumin for quite some time, and for those of you who aren't particularly familiar possibly with curcumin, it's a polyphenol. It's associated with, or we kind of think of it more as turmeric. So turmeric's been used for centuries as this spice for managing a lot of sort of inflammatory conditions. Some of the issues related to curcumin as a isolated product from turmeric is that it is poorly bioavailable, so it gets broken down really, really quickly. It's got a very short half-life. It's kind of transformed in the liver, and the body gets rid of it really quickly. So to be able to overcome some of the poor bioavailability issues related to curcumin uptake, we've incorporated something called long vida curcumin. So we'll be bringing out long vida curcumin in early 2017. We hope to have it in January for you. It's a really exciting addition to our current range. Not only is it massively antioxidant, but it just has huge benefits in a number of pro-inflammatory conditions. So it's going to be the wonderful synergistic nutrient to add on to our Farm EPA range and alongside some of our other products as well. And just briefly to sort of give you an indication of why long vida over other curcumin products is that long vida optimizes this wonderful sort of delivery system. So by incorporating long vida, we're actually able to protect curcumin from the sort of pH conditions found within the gut, so it doesn't get destroyed by the acidic environment of the stomach. It actually changes the particle size as well, so it has easy passage across the intestinal cell membrane, and it kind of provides this wonderful unique coating of fatty acids and phospholipids. It surrounds the curcumin molecule, and it actually enables it to be transported into the lymphatic system rather than the circulation itself. And now that is important, because if you get into the lymphatic system, bypasses the liver. If you bypasses the liver, you don't get your you don't get your curcumin metabolized. So you get less curcumin exposed to sort of metabolic enzymes, and it remains in its free form. And that's what's really crucial for this product, is that unlike other products that are in sort of that have been glucuronidated, for example, our long vida curcumin delivers curcumin in the free form, and it's the free form that has the benefits. It's the free form that can cross the blood-brain barrier, and it's the free form that is going to offer you the most significant health benefits. And so it also stays in the body longer because it's not metabolized. Generally, curcumin is sort of, because it's gluconated or gets sulfide attachments to it, it renders it very highly water soluble, and so it can get excreted by the kidneys and so on. But because long vida keeps it as the free form, stays in the body can't get rid of it, so it stays in the body longer. and so it has longer duration of action. We will be talking to you about our new Longvida in a webinar in January, I believe. So either keep your eyes peeled. If you see it advertised, sign up, because you're going to want to know about this one. So that's the exciting news for January of next year. And again, for those of you who have been sort of keeping tabs on what we're doing, you'll probably be aware that we've just launched our new multivitamin and mineral supplement. This is within our Pure Essentials range. Again, we look at our ingredients incredibly carefully, so we only use body-ready methylated vitamins. We use nice forms of things like iron and iodine, so everything has been optimized for optimal absorption, keeping blood levels nice and high as well. So again, we do slow release, body-ready active forms, and this is proving to be incredibly popular. And it sits quite nicely alongside our wonderful omega-3. This is our Pure Essentials, so for anybody who doesn't want that little bit of GLA in their omega-3 supplement, then our Pure Essentials omega-3 is probably the one for you. Nice high EPA to DHA ratio, so we've got 410 milligrams of EPA, 250 DHA in each capsule, slightly bigger capsules, so this may be more appropriate for people who are looking for something more of a sort of like a general health product rather than something that is going to be therapeutic. Obviously, you've got our Farm EPA Restore and Maintain for therapeutics. And this is our product range. So we are adding products to it relatively quickly these days. We can't wait to tell you about our new Longvida curcumin product. But for the moment, you can have a quick look here at our pure therapeutic range. So we've got our Farm EPA for cheaper chewables. We've got our EPA seed oil for our vegetarian and vegan friends. And then we've got our wonderful comprehensive bone and joint supplements, Omega Flex Duo. And then our wonderful additional nutrients. We've got Neurobalance, zinc, magnesium, B6, Super B Complex. Again, this is a really, really good product for supporting methylation. And then our wonderful antioxidant Vesisorbibiquinol, which is incredibly beneficial in managing conditions such as CFS, fibromyalgia, cardiovascular issues as well. And then we've got our wonderful well-being range at the bottom. So there's huge synergistic benefits from incorporating omega-3 with some additional nutrients as well. So focusing 4 areas of sort of brain and mind health. And I think I'm going to end the webinar here, but just saying thank you very much, everybody. Any questions that you have, if you've got anything sort of educationally wise, then please speak to Sophie Tully. She'll be able to tell you about when our next sort of set of webinars are going to come out. If you've got any webinar ideas or requests, feel free to get in touch. So I know quite a lot of you already sort of email us quite regularly with sort of questions and sort of wanting to find out a little bit more about everything that we're doing and we plan to do. So feel free to get in touch via Sophie. If you've got any technical questions, feel free to bombard me. Otherwise, I'm just going to see if there's any. Just going into our Q&A box and seeing if there is anything in there that I can answer. Right, okay. Okay, I'm just having a quick look through the Alexander. Okay, hi Alexander. Okay, question not too late. I have a peculiar experience with fish oils in the last year. I've suffered with extreme period pain. Found that fish oils make the pain significantly worse. Okay, I'll tell you what, Alexander, if you want to email me directly, it might be easier actually, because it would be interesting to know a little bit more about the supplement that you're taking. Generally, we would assume that fish oils through sort of the anti-inflammatory prostaglandins would actually help out with sort of chronic pain itself, and certainly with period pain. So it's a little unusual that you're getting that side effect from that. I'm not familiar with Lionheart brand. Yeah, if you want to get in touch, and we'll bash our heads and see if we can get an answer for you there. And so next question is from Linda Perkins. The client with low AA. We actually recommended Farmipa Maintain. So I think, if I recall from the client's personal records, that based on their body weight, I think they were recommended 2 grams per day to get their omega-3 index and AA-EPA ratio sort of resolved. Because her arachidonic acid levels were low and her EPA and DHA levels were also low, we went straight in with 2 grams of Farmipa Maintain. So that would have supported arachidonic acid levels and EPA and DHA as well. We're getting some really nice before and afters as well. So we're getting more and more clients who are coming back after 12 months now and getting their levels checked and being very happy with their results, I must admit. We're seeing some really nice improvements. Not only are we seeing nice improvements in fatty acid levels, but our practitioners are actually reporting really positive outcomes in regards to symptoms as well. Okay, LE optic disc with fuzzy edges. Okay, so that's it's not something that I'm familiar with, Kirsten. I'm assuming that we are looking at that. That to me looks like some kind of eye issue. I would suggest that the DHA, obviously because we're looking at eye health, may be related to the kind of high concentration DHA there. So his nutrient profile, Geneva 1 test, be interesting to see that one as well. I'll be able to comment a little bit more personally if you were to get in touch. Be happy to sort of get in touch with me, and I'll have a look through that and be able to comment a little bit more specifically for you. Okay, so anonymous viewer, I give my children Vegeta Orange chewables, but notice it doesn't contain DHA. Well, actually, the Vegeta chewables was formulated some time ago, and it was formulated as a product to help with neurocognitive issues with children. The evidence, certainly at the time, and I'm aware that it's relatively similar still, I think, is that high EPA appears to be exceptionally beneficial when looking at cognitive function rather than sort of cognitive structure. So, for example, a lot of children with ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia appear to respond more favorably when EPA is either isolated or certainly in excess of DHA. On ongoing supplementation in non-fish eating individuals, would you suggest occasional breaks in supplementation? Okay, so if you're, I'm assuming that you're, Kirsten, I'm assuming that you are supplementing with fish oils in non-fish eating individuals. I don't see any reason why you would need to do occasional breaks in supplementation. The issue with, obviously, with essential fatty acids is that if you're not consuming them in your diet, especially long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, then your body isn't going to be very good at actually making them itself. So I find quite a lot of the time people will be taking, you know, they're quite happy to understand the need for high-strength omega-3s to achieve higher levels of omega-3 or favorable levels of omega-3. And then when they get there, they say, can I stop now? And the answer is yes, of course you can stop now, but your omega-3 levels will go back. So I think there's a kind of a washout period of about 8 to 12 weeks. So if you if you stop taking omega-3 supplements for 2 or 3 days, you're really not going to see that much sort of decline in omega-3 levels. But if you take breaks of sort of, you know, months or something like that, then your levels will start to decline. So generally it's well established now that in order to have higher levels of omega-3, long-chain omega-3s, you need to eat plenty of long-chain omega-3s. And I think the first few slides in today's webinar has really kind of emphasized just exactly how much we need. Okay, because now another question. Concentration process, does it injure the double bonds of the omega-3 acid? Right, okay, so there's lots of ways that we can purify omega-3 fish oils. And the first thing to sort of like really point out actually is that from the moment that your fish are caught, they have to be heated to some extent to be able to isolate the omega-3 fatty acids from the protein. The fatty acids are then go off into the sort of into the fish oil supplementation sort of pathway. If the situations are not adequately controlled, there could be some sort of concentration processes that can injure the double bonds of the omega-3 fatty acids. But you would see that come through when you're looking at some of the peroxidation end products that are derived at the end of the processing itself. So all concentration process will have some kind of long-term effect in regards to sort of how fatty acids are actually concentrated themselves. The end products are stable, and you can see the stability of your end product by measuring the Totox value. So if your Totox value, the lower the Totox value, the better. So that kind of goes back to the process itself in regards to how much potential damage there is, I suppose. So yeah, you would kind of assume that there was the concentration processes is going to kind of injure double bonds, but you can tell by the resulting Totox value at the end. So the stability of the oil is measured by the Totox value. So you want a Totox value as low as possible. Okay, so hopefully I've answered everybody's questions. If anything hasn't been quite clear, like I say, feel free to get in touch. I can answer anything technical or anything sort of advisory. If you want a little bit about, if you want to know more about our products, or if you want to know about any up and coming products that are coming out, if you want to know more information about our webinars or our education materials, then certainly feel free to get in touch and Sophie will be able to help you out. Otherwise, it may be a little bit early to say this, but everybody have a fantastic Christmas and New Year. And we look forward to seeing you all again in January. And I'll be telling you all about our wonderful Longvida curcumin product. So until then, everybody, and excuse me, I've had a bit of a cold for the last few days, so I'm getting a little bit chesty now. I shall say goodbye and thank you very much. Bye-bye.